This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow.
Hey, cannabis operators, got a couple questions for you. Are your SOPs tied directly to your cultivation plans? Can you easily manage your inventory and workforce and vendors from a single system? Can you manage compliance across multiple licenses and states? Do you have performance analytics to help you maximize your 24-month cultivation and manufacturing plans? If this is not the case, Regrow is there to help. They can help you maximize your yields and consistency. Think of Regrow as the single pane of glass view into your entire supply chain. They're available globally with native localization and foreign language support. So if you're a cannabis company searching for a strategic business partner to help you automate your business, scale effectively, and make the supply chain work for you, you can find Regrow at regrow.io. That's regrow.io. Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Thomas and Tyme and Thomas. What's going on, guys?
Hey, how's it going, man? Thanks for having us on tonight.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yes, of course. Thank you both for, spending time with me this evening. And we're going to be diving into a lot of different topics. But before we do, I first want to talk about y'all's backgrounds so that the audience gets a better sense of who you are, and what led you to become co-founders of the Pantheon Collective. Tyme, we'll start with you first. I know that you had two roles that involved former director of operations, one in Colorado with the farm company, and then the other with Mayflower Medicinals in Massachusetts. So talk to us a little bit about that prior experience, and maybe even before that, and what kind of got you interested in cannabis.
So I guess if we're going to rewind to what got me interested in cannabis all the way that far, then it's I, as a kid, because with the name Tyme, of course, you expect it, hippie carny parents. And my way of rebelling was to not be a participant of cannabis or anything like that. And so that was my rebellious phase. I had started my career doing U.S. expansion for companies like French Connection, Diesel, H&M. And then some dear friends of mine, Jan Cole and her late husband, LJ, were starting a new business. It was the first of two waves of medical programs that rolled out in the state of Colorado. And they wanted someone with corporate background that could help with structuring, figuring out merchandising, all that sort of stuff. So I went down and didn't leave for years later. And now I've been in the industry for almost 2 decades, not to date myself too much there. Over the last 2 years, I've gone from, director of operations at the farm, director of operations out in Massachusetts with Mayflower Medicinals, a lot of time in between consulting, between personal projects and consulting work. I've helped get about 15 licenses across 5 states, from California, Colorado, Massachusetts, Vermont, and now I'm excited to bring it back to my home state of New York, where I grew up.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like that hippie, I guess, background, where your name originated kind of just pulled you back in, sucked you back in 20 plus years later, right?
Destiny in names. What can I say? It was decided for me before I was even a twinkle in the eye.
That's right. And Thomas, let's talk about you, man. What brought you to this point in your career?
Oh, so actually it all began for me. I'm an acupuncturist and I was studying Chinese medicine. And my first real taste of how cannabis is a medicine actually happened in LA at an HIV clinic. And I was interning there in acupuncture school, and I was learning from all of these different patients about how cannabis was helping them with the HIV different symptoms. And especially one of the biggest things was dealing with the side effects from the medications. And this was in, I think, about 2003 or 2004.
Wow.
And then after that, I really started to think about how cannabis could help to actually worked together with the Chinese herbs and Chinese herbal formulas to strengthen the effects, the synergistic effects of both cannabis and traditional Chinese medicine and how it would benefit patients. Hemp in particular has been used in China for about 2,000 years. And it was mostly used for issues dealing with constipation or dryness. And so it has quite a long history all throughout the world in medicine. And then I met Tyme probably about 5 years ago after I moved back to New York State, where I grew up. And the two of us started talking about his experience in the cannabis industry, and then my focus on medicine and herbal medicine. And then we started researching New York's medical market, and we saw a real opportunity. And then as we started to form the company and also figure out our philosophy, then the adult use market is opening up in New York. And so since then we've discovered many more things about how we can add to the cannabis culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love how you talked about, the Eastern holistic or alternative medicine that has been in practice for, what you said, over 2,000 years, probably more.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how it seems like we're slowly kind of gravitating back to, more natural remedies, or at least blending the two, right? The Eastern and Western medicine cultures. It's a very interesting time. So I appreciate you both sharing your background. And, I want to kick this conversation off. And I was thinking through, we're preparing for it, and I usually tweet out a teaser where I'll say, what do you want to know about? Or what topics do you want to learn about?
And I saw that on your Instagram.
Yeah. And one tweet that I came back with was one that I was like, when I was prepping, I was thinking, I'm going to kick this conversation off with kind of this thought. And this gentleman, Steve, is at Vitamin Steve on Twitter, asks, what does LGBTQ plus equity have to do with cannabis? I can see the link between Blacks and Latinos because of their excessive incarcerations just for using cannabis. But the word equity seems to be thrown around like a football. I don't know if I agree with that last point, but he's bringing up the point of like, well, where does LGBTQ fit in the discussion of social equity, and how has the LGBTQ plus community been harmed by cannabis prohibition over the years?
A topic I love very much to talk about and educating people on, because until we started this process, so when the social equity program first came out, that was when Tom and I together were like, there's an opportunity here that LGBT should have been included. Because, there's about 13 states in the US that have some form of a social equity program as part of their cannabis, whether adult use program or medical program. And of those, New York is the first one to really go through and like name names. It's the BIPOC community, it's disenfranchised farmers, it's women, and it's service disabled veterans, right? And as soon as I saw names actually being listed, I was appalled that LGBTQ plus wasn't on there. For one, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations right now if it wasn't for LGBTQ plus activists. It was Dennis Perone, Brownie Mary, and Peter Scott that ran up to get Prop 219 pushed for the first medical program. For the first medical program in California. And it's been that momentum and the push for the programs because of the HIV/AIDS epidemic that have continued to roll from state to state to state. And now, we've got 37 states that currently have some form of a cannabis program. And that was a lot of momentum from LGBTQ plus almost exclusively. And people
one of the main issues behind Prop 216 was a result of the HIV epidemic, because cannabis was a proven treatment for HIV wasting syndrome. It helped to maintain the appetite and to reduce nausea so that HIV patients and AIDS patients were able to maintain their weight and to maintain a more healthy immune system. So,
And what year was that, Thomas?
1996.
1996 in California, Prop 216.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so when immediately, I live with
sorry,
HIV.
one other question. I'm sorry, Tyme, to cut you off. Please hold that thought. One other question was a bill that was kind of allowing cannabis to be used by HIV/AIDS patients, correct?
Correct. And
And-
started expanding the entire medical program that we've seen today.
Okay, so it started with AIDS, and then that's where it kind of built upon that program from there.
Absolutely. The first federally funded cannabis grows, when they finally started, the few cases were all HIV/AIDS based.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's where it all started. And then it's important to denote that, we've known for a very, very long time that cannabis helps with a lot of the symptoms of HIV/AIDS. We've known at least since 1996, when states like California started bringing it on. And yet states like New York decided not to start bringing on a medical program until 2015. We went through the entire HIV/AIDS epidemic, knowing that there was something that these men and women that had HIV/AIDS in the peak of it died horrific, painful, slow, agonizing deaths. It was, comparable, closest to the Black Plague, medieval times. So to think that there was a medicine out there that was available and the state didn't bother to consider it until 2015, the fact that the federal government still hasn't considered it is frankly deplorable. It's basically genocide, if you ask me. And cannabis forever has only been used as a social political tool. Dating back to 1915, when we had the first cannabis regulations come out down in Texas, it was because there was the Mexican Revolution. All these Mexicans were coming up and they had cannabis on them. You could smell that really easy. It was a target. And that became the footprint for all of the horrific stuff that this has done to the BIPOC community. It was just this huge, easy, oh yeah, we can smell it, we can target, we can harass. So to all of our brothers and sisters of color, it's definitely, they're top on that list. But when we talk about social equity, it's concerning to me that the majority of us don't know the meaning of it. So social equity started in the 1960s, and the whole premise behind social equity at its core, it's about inclusivity. It's about, you have to include as many people as possible so as that you can acknowledge that each person, each group, each demographic has some different type of need for assistance or to be pushed up, whether it just because of, bad laws that were put out forever trying to correct social injustices, that we can balance this. The more inclusive, the better we can balance, the better a system it is, and the closer that we get to a truly equitable system. So again, the New York City program calls out BIPOC, it calls out women and service-disabled veterans, which, we believe that it should be both disabled persons and veterans separately as entities should be allowed into the social equity program. But at the root of it, since the New York State program has, in its verbiage, says that this is for communities disproportionately impacted by the prohibition of cannabis and its enforcement, there's only three groups that applies to: the BIPOC community of color, disenfranchised farmers, because going back into the 1930s with the first hemp tax laws, marijuana tax laws, that was an elitist attack during the Roosevelt administration, with groups like Hearst and DuPont that had just invested heavily in a new nylon factory. They represented big wood, like all of these major industries, and hemp was a problem for them because it could be made so quickly. So then that got turned into and against it. So disenfranchised farmers, that was one of the largest cash crops that the United States had since its inception. And now all of a sudden we were forced as farmers to find new crops to grow, new methods, a whole new learning curve that decimated our farmers. And a lot from those aspects of the 1930s, family farms have still not recovered from it. So that is disgusting. So we got BIPOC being arrested all over the place, farmers being pushed out of the way of what their living could be. And then unfortunately, the other two groups that, although, both Tom and I agree that it's super, super important that they're included for a better equity program, don't have a direct line to cannabis prohibition affecting anything. And that's women and the service disabled veterans. And then to have the other group, LGBTQ+, we are incarcerated at significantly higher rates, especially our transgender brothers and sisters that are out there. We are more focused in different illicit drug use because of suicide rates and depression and identity issues. And again, cannabis is often, especially for sex worker friends, used as, the easy out for police to be able to start a search and frisk or, arrest them or whatever it was to keep that industrial prison machine rolling. So we have a direct line. So long story longer, as all of mine are. That's the kind of the snapshot on it. I'll let Tom add anything else on.
So that being said, the Pantheon Collective is an LGBT majority owned business. And as we've started this, we've discovered a few alarming things. Number one, our community doesn't understand the legacy, which is cannabis legalization, which began because of the LGBT community.
That's what I was going to ask you, Tom. I'm sorry. Yeah. That was going to be that's a perfect segue. I was going to ask, so first off, thanks, Tyme, for that background and history. Really appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners are up to speed now as to kind of what we're talking about. And Tom, my question too is going to be so what's the level of understanding? It sounds like there's a lack of understanding on the side of the government. It's from your all's perspective, right? Because LGBTQ should be included from your perspective in those social equity programs. But then what's the level of education among your own community? And that's, I think, what you were getting at right here.
Yeah, so those are actually the two things that I'm getting at. The first is the fact that our community doesn't even know the extent of our own legacy. So the legacy of cannabis legalization has led to the expungement of criminal records. It's led to understanding cannabis as a medicine, which has helped millions of patients across the United States. And it began because of Prop 216 in California because of the LGBT community. That's where it began. And I would love the LGBT community to understand that this is one of the things that we've done for social activism. The next issue is that
can I pause you right there before you go on to the next one? So here's a couple of questions with that. So first off, how's that received among the community? I mean, that's what the Pantheon Collective is all about, right? So, I mean, are they receptive? And then what does the cannabis culture look like within the LGBTQ community? Is it something that this could even be top of mind for them?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So first thing, as we've researched this issue, we've learned that there is currently no metric to track LGBT participation as entrepreneurs or employees in the entire United States cannabis market.
There's no method of doing it. Oh, so that doesn't you're saying that method of reporting doesn't exist, so therefore the data is not there.
It is not there. So it is not, we are not viewed, we are not being represented, and no one's asking the questions. So the Pantheon Collective, at the same time that we're a startup cannabis company, we're engaged in social justice on the political level in New York State, right? Because this is a movement for our community. This is a way that if we became part of the social economic program, it would give a leg up to other LGBT people. Now, the other issue is that Tyme alluded to about the social equity program is that most people like to delineate it based on race, and they think that it's only based on race. Well, it's not so much. It's based on equity. And for the LGBT community, it's a question of discrimination based upon sexual orientation and or gender identity. So these are the issues that LGBT individuals face every day, and especially as we're raising money for a cannabis startup or any LGBT entrepreneur raising money. At a certain point, they usually do face that prejudice or that hurdle. But the next issue that we've discovered is that there's a real power vacuum of LGBT equality rights groups. After the Marriage Equality Act passed, they kind of disappeared. And I think it was a generational issue. They accomplished something that they really needed to do. But this is our generation's next push. How do we propel ourselves forward in entrepreneurship, into business, so that we also maintain our identity at the same time as we're moving out into the world and trying to gain equal status.
Yeah.
When it comes back, sorry, I just wanted to add in there really quick that when it comes to like the acceptance level and like you were asking about how people are when we explain it, one, it's been really crazy to see the amount of folks that we actually have to explain it to, that we would have otherwise just expected them to have known at least some of this stuff. We've had a wonderful opportunity to chat some with the team of the majority leader, Krista Peoples-Stokes, her chief of staff. And, it's concerning that we had LGBTQ plus individuals that were in the room that didn't, when they were writing the social equity program, and none of them thought to include their own group. So that was alarming. But every single person that we talked to, immediately it's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. There is this parallel. And I think, like, to Tom's point with the vacuum, we lost all those lives during the HIV/AIDS peak epidemic. Now, obviously, HIV/AIDS has moved on, unfortunately, to not just being LGBTQ plus focused. It's a universal issue. But, at that point in time, it was largely our group, and it decimated us. And those were the people that should have been our additional activists, our additional legislators, all of those things that they should have been alive for, to be there to make sure that our community was represented. And now we don't have that. And it's upsetting too, to me, to hear some of the, and I'm going to sound like an old man right now, but I don't care. Some of these younger whippersnappers that are out there.
Yes, you definitely sound older saying that. Absolutely. Yes.
They haven't had to know about the AIDS epidemic. For the most part, majority of gay men especially are on drugs like PrEP, if they are negative. So it's easier to cross. And so they didn't know about the horrors. Like, I saw friends die in the early phases of AIDS. I know in 2004, when I got my HIV diagnosis, that it was further along. We had lots of meds, but it was still a conversation with my family where we thought it was, to a degree, a death sentence. And none of that. Now it's regulated no different than diabetes. You take a pill every day and you're generally good to go.
Yeah, I mean, you both bring up really good points, and I understand the approach, right? I understand the history and how this is an opportunity for the LGBTQ plus community to really rally around this and help advance the ball, not only in their own respect, but I mean, for the greater good of the industry as well, right? And Tyme, you mentioned earlier, like, you talked about women, and you talked about, like, women is another example of, like, how and I've said this before, how the ball could be advanced. I mean, there is so much focus on progressivism in this day and age, and, women's equality and LGBTQ plus, rights. And so, using cannabis as another kind of focal point, in that disenfranchised group, I think it makes sense. But here's my question is like, well, where is the LGBT community's role in cannabis activism? I mean, I think Tom, you touched on it, like there is a mental health crisis going on out here right now, right? And both you said that there's this identity crisis that the community faces and a lot of pressure when it comes to probably coming out to their families who may not be as accepting and whatnot. And cannabis is an alternative for that. It helps. It's a remedy. So what's the plan? Like, how do you get people to rally around this with so much other issues going on?
It's a lot of just education, to be honest. And it's important for us to recognize this, especially right now when we have states like Florida passing Don't Say Gay programs in their schools, when we have states like Texas going through and banning transgender.
But isn't that aren't they teaching kids sex at 5 years old? Isn't that what that, it's not necessarily saying they can't say gay. I know that bill is very confusing with the way in which it's titled, but isn't that the scope of the bill, is that they're teaching children at 5 years old sex education?
It has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with at that point, if you look at what the curriculum is based on, it meant, because we had books introduced that talked about Junior has two dads or two moms. It's about acknowledging for youth all the way up that love is love. That doesn't have anything to do with sex.
It's more than gay, though. It's more than gay, though, isn't it? I mean, it's talking more about gender identity now and things that are new to society as a whole that we're still trying to kind of.
Right. Yeah.
Same hurdles like cannabis, that everyone hears cannabis, and of a certain generation, they are just plug their ears and all they hear is that it's the devil's weed and we're all going to burn in hell in a giant sex orgy. So,
but these things take time, though, right? I mean, like.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. It's very. That's a really good point. That, the same view has happened for cannabis, but the most alarming thing about this Don't Say Gay issue and how it's catapulting and it's getting larger and larger is, I read another article about in other states, I think it was Oklahoma or something like that, people targeting transgender youth and their medical access. So
that's not right. Yeah.
So when does it stop? And one of the issues that we have here is that New York's social equity program is really the largest and most progressive of its kind in the nation, which is so exciting. Like it's really interesting, and it's trying to, it's opening up 50% of the licenses to social equity applicants so that the state's cannabis market is not only controlled by MSOs, it's trying to, create that like leg up to all these different groups. Right.
And is it perfect? No, but it's a good start. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah. And the backdrop of that is Don't Say Gay. And our point with New York State is to say LGBT, say our name, recognize the legacy and that we've provided for cannabis legalization, and let's move forward. Because one of the aspects too is that LGBT individuals usually feel more comfortable with LGBT settings, LGBT-owned businesses. That's why you see gay flags places. And you know what? LGBT people flock there and they spend their money. And right. Many people that aren't part of the LGBT, they just hang their flag up and they get the same the same advantage. But if you have LGBT-owned businesses, most likely you will have more LGBT individuals hired, because we're not necessarily as uncomfortable with sexual or different sexual orientations or different gender identities. So this is a way to also help a community which has been disproportionately affected by their identities.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from. And so how is New York State receiving those conversations? I mean, is there any progress that's being made? And I know that even sales within New York State for cannabis for adult use is still on hold. So where is all this kind of shaking up? And, are y'all making progress?
Yeah, everything is moving forward. Every time that we talk to another person, they understand the LGBTQ plus piece in this puzzle. I do want to point out too that the LGBTQ plus group not only is the symbol of freaking rainbow, but we are a goddamn rainbow. We are Black, we are white, we are Latino, we are Asian, we are men, we are women, we are transgender, we are every age, race, anything is rolled up in LGBT. We're the all-inclusive minority group.
And that's like the perfect blend with cannabis, right? Because I think I've said before that cannabis is this plant that brings every demographic together. Guys, I was just at a CBD Delta 8, Delta 9 conference in Dallas, Texas, and I had a booth there, and I was just looking around, and I was like, every walk of life is in that building. You have older folks, you have white people, you have Black people, you have Asian people, you have Latinos, you have Asians, you have transgender, you have young, old. I mean, every kind of person, and they're all just kind of curious, coming around just asking about it because it helped their ailment here, or it helped their loved one with this ailment, or whatever it may be. It's just incredible. So I see what you're saying, Tyme, in terms of the LGBTQ plus community being that rainbow, and then also cannabis on the same token, bringing all these different diverse people together.
Well, and it's also, we need to look at the fact that, so the majority of US economy is dominated obviously by cisgender, heteronormative, white males that are rather affluent, right? So that's why
you are just on one, my man.
I just go for it. We're kind of, at first glance, we're a weird social equity advocate because we're white dudes. And we definitely have gotten some pushback on that, but we're also LGBTQ plus, and we aren't looked
I don't know why it's bad to be white anymore. Like it seems like it's been, is it bad to be white now? Also, I'm not white, by the way, I'm Latino, but is it bad to be white? I don't understand.
Well, we did a weird exercise internally when we were like having these conversations about identity and stuff. And I was like, asked everybody on the team, how, when you identify yourself, how do you list things? And all three white people that were on the group, we list our race absolutely last. We're first gays. And then on from there, where that's not true of our brothers and sisters of color. And I think that has to come with that. Any group, whatever is your slighting, your area that you would normally be attacked by, I think most of us as various types of minority groups, that's who we embrace the most, is how we're being pushed down. That we're being pushed down because we're gay, we're pushed down because we're Black, we're pushed down because we're women. So that is our power, that right there. And to come full circle, and I get goosebumps talking about this stuff, but we've got an amazing opportunity here. The cannabis market is going to be the largest industry in the entire United States, eventually the entire world, the way that it's dropping down like dominoes at this point. What better thing than to have the control of the largest economy be all these minority groups that should be binding together? We should be rooms full of our veterans that have been put on the sideline by our government and by other people, to all the women that their drunk husbands beat them, whereas their stoned husband would have just cuddled a little bit more, to, our differently abled friends and brothers and sisters, people like all of us should be coming together to take over this industry. And what a game changer that could be for equality for all of us that are in that group. When we can show by an example that this is a plant that is for everyone, it's represented by everyone, we are all inclusive, and hate has no home in cannabis. So
that's well said, Tyme. That's your soundbite of the episode, man. You killed it on that one. And
that
no,
was
I'm
good.
serious. It was beautiful. Yeah, I totally agree 100%. And isn't it the ultimate American success story? If I mean, when it comes to fruition, everything you said, Time, all these diverse groups, the melting pot of what the US is built upon, right? And to have all these different people come together and build something beautiful that actually helps not only mankind, but the environment. I mean, planting hemp is the most eco-sustainable thing you could do. It enriches
The
the soil,
strongest carbon
right?
pullouter.
Right. And it's like with so much public support and everyone that could be involved in uplifting these communities that have been disenfranchised, I just don't understand. But we're gonna get there, and I want to leave y'all with the floor. Tell me a little more about Pantheon Collective and your focus for this year and beyond, and anything else that you want to cover on before we wrap up here.
Sure. So I'll do the story of Pantheon quick and how we came up with the name, which I think is important and goes to everything that we've been talking about. I mean, outside of already having a love for different religious ideologies and mythology and stuff like that across cultures, Pantheon is about a culmination. Like you generally think of the Greek Pantheon, that it's, you know, all those Olympians brought together, but it just means any type of group brought in. And we were looking around at the state that the country was in at the time that we started this company 3 years ago. We were looking at the amount of hate and distrust and disloyalty. And we were like, no, we need someplace where it's all inclusive. Religion is constantly at the top, or spirituality, of that hate list, or used as a tool for hate. And we're like, no, this should be all inclusive. I want t-shirts that have Buddha, God, and Jesus all smoking joints, because that is what it should really be about. And almost all of them did participate historically in cannabis. So, you know, we wanted to be a unifying force where our story is about us coming together. It's about communities coming together. And it's about us being a part in our community and working with other businesses too, because cannabis is so awesome that it spans into technology, it's agribusiness, it's retail, it's clothing, you know, it's everything. So that's kind of how we got started with the company. And then Tom, do you want to go?
So I actually wanted to go off on a little bit of a different tangent
Sure.
that I've been thinking about and that's dealing with terpenes. So we did a great webinar the other day. I'm sorry, I can't remember the individual's name, but talking about the endocannabinoid system and extraction of terpenes and how scientifically terpenes aren't really that necessarily important. Well, in terms of using the whole plant, which Chinese medicine, that's what it's focused on. The terpenes represent the taste and the aroma of the plant, and those are what actually guide the energy of the plant into different areas, different systems, different organs, and different energetic channels of the body. So that is actually a different level of experience, which right now our science isn't really. I would say it's not really strong enough to pick up on all those nuances, but that is how the holistic medicine of cannabis works. And I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier, and another guest had been talking about that, and I would like to push that energetic aspect of the plant forward as well, just so that we're not stripping away a level of the medicine, which maybe we don't always understand, but which is the experience of an herb is also very important to its medicinal effects.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's super important when you talk about that full spectrum, that entourage effect. It's everything, right? It's the cannabinoids, it's the terpenes, it's the flavonoids, and we all have different genetic makeup. So how one's body interacts with those compounds is different than, say, another person. Isn't that right?
It's unity, it's connecting, it's, you know, it's the common thread through all of it. Real quick, just so as that we get our special plug-in for Pantheon right now too.
Sure.
So we've
Thank
got
you,
this
Tom.
great company that we're starting. I'm the CEO. Tom is the chief medical officer. We have a couple other co-founders right now. We are going to be the first of its kind fully immersive cannabis campus for education. We're going for an adult use cannabis license. We're trying to bring it to actually my hometown of Boonville, New York, a small town in the foothills of the Adirondacks that, you know, back in when I was a kid was decimated economically. And now that I've done all this stuff out in the other states, I'm totally geared up to be able to bring all this economic opportunity back to Oneida and Lewis County, back to my hometown.
Nice.
So we're going to have the adult use campus with a really big push on education. There'll be an auditorium on site for different speakers and events and trying to make it a hub. We'll also, so we'll have the retail space and everything there, full extractions, edibles kitchen, then just a 5-minute shuttle down the road. We'll have, starting with 50 acres of industrial hemp. We know that in New York State, there is a huge lack of processing equipment, which makes it hard for other farmers. So we're already working with county representatives so as that we can bring farmers together, use our processing equipment so as that they can get more value out of their harvests. We'll have 50 acres of harvest, which will build up to 300 acres over the next 2 years. And also on that property will be our retreat space, where we're going to have about 5 tiny homes, games, educational events, and doing everything from like wellness events and weekend retreats to corporate team bonding and things. So it's really going to be a one of its kind in the US. And New York's got to have its Boulder, Colorado, it's Denver, it's cannabis hub, and I'm hoping to bring it right smack in the middle of the whole state here.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it sounds like cannabis Disneyland for adults, really. I mean, you got it all. The retreat, the tiny homes, the auditorium for education, not to mention the retail space. I mean,
I
that's
do
awesome.
want to eventually have a Ferris wheel on the property because that's my family lineage, is the inventor of the Ferris wheel.
Really?
Yeah, George Washington Gale Ferris, my great uncle. So I would like to have a Ferris wheel sometime on the property. That's one of my goals, is to make it enough that I can afford my own Ferris wheel. But we are in the middle of a $30 million raise right now too. So, you know, trying to take on any investors that we can to make this happen, and it's going to be great.
Awesome. Yeah. And that Ferris wheel, you can put a sign that says, "Get high while you're high."
Right. I like it. I'm giving you credit for the tagline when we use that. When it goes out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that time. Tom, anything else on your mind before we wrap up here?
No, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Yes, of course.
This was really great. It was great talking with you. Thank you.
Yeah, guys, I really enjoyed it as well. And yeah, as things progress and as you start to make more momentum and traction within the LGBTQ plus community in regards to the, you know, the history of cannabis and really the start of medical cannabis in California, let's have you back on to see how that's going.
Would love to. That'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again. And thank you all for listening. Bye.